Hello everyone, I'm Oswin, and today I'm going to be talking about Zork, making the best out of what you have. So Zork was a text-only adventure game that was released in the 80s, and the development was primarily done by four bored MIT students that had previously played a lot of text adventure games around campus. So the predecessor games were a lot more limited in their modes of interaction and in terms of their narrative, in that they were a lot more kind of demos for what the hardware could do at the time, what new computers could do at the time. So Zork's production team wanted to integrate a rich narrative and a rich form of interaction in order to produce an interesting game. Now, the text-only kind of format wasn't really a design choice. It was a limitation of the hardware at the time. So to the left, we have machine running Windows 95, which has about 4 to 8 megabytes of memory, which allows it to easily run kind of more complicated applications. For example, the first-person shooter Doom, which was released in 1993. To the right is what are the computers that they had at MIT at the time. Has no RAM, and it has half a megabyte of total memory, which ultimately makes it really hard to even just kind of display a picture on the screen, let alone render an entire game. So these limitations push the developers to sacrifice this more visual mode for other modes of engagement, like through interaction. So the interaction within Zork is pretty simple on paper. The computer describes a scenario, detailing a scene, any sort of interactable objects, and explorable locations, and gives the user a prompt by which they can type out their thoughts, and the game will kind of act on those thoughts. So the simplest form of this is these two-word commands, where you have a verb, which is applied to a noun that follows. So go north or take sack are two big examples of this that were pretty common. This wasn't anything new relative to the other text adventure games, but for those other games, that's where the interaction ended, and this made gameplay very, very boring and repetitive. So the developers of Zork leveraged more complicated like text manipulation to allow for more natural feeling commands, an example of which is right here. We have a three-word command, and in this case, this action doesn't directly modify the game world. It just gives the user a little bit more information, adding another layer to this interactivity. And this sort of new layer allowed for more complicated puzzles to be made within Zork. So for instance, using this listening function, a user can listen within a dungeon to find out where enemies are so that they can actively avoid them to kind of avoid any unprecedented altercations, or they can use it, let's say when they're trapped in a cave, to find out if for example, to listen for birds to find out if there's a way out nearby. And this sort of ingenuity allowed Zork to be a lot more in-depth and interactive with the player, which allowed it to dominate in this text adventure genre. So looking at it through the lens of Meadow's forms of interaction, we have a very solid input-output system where the user inputs actions and the output of the game is actively modified. An inside form of interaction where the user's imagination is paramount to the progression of the game, in that whatever you think of can probably be done in the game, so you might as well type it out and try whatever you can. And an open world where you have responses from the world that are sometimes unpredictable. Like for instance, your attacks can, in some cases, miss, which force you to do a recalculation whenever you're doing combat, so that you can kind of think about what your next steps would be. So ultimately, despite their limited resources, the creators of Zork leveraged what they had to produce a rich, interactive game world, which allowed their game to dominate within the entire genre until more powerful computers came out. Even today, a lot of game developers are inspired by the ingenuity of Zork's producers, using that to fuel their own projects. Thank you.